for the third panel today. This panel is going to be a discussion mostly about interdisciplinary reflection on Ukraine, but also about the role of scholars in discourses on Ukraine in the public. I guess many of us have experienced a change in our public role as scholars in a field that was rather marginal for the public sphere until very recently. But since last year, many of us have had to engage with media in various forms, have been in public attention, and have also experienced the challenges that there are to positioning oneself politically in a situation where people expect scholarly objectivity. On this panel, we're going to have four wonderful panelists whom I'm going to present now, and then everyone is going to give an input before we move on to the discussion. So to my right is our first speaker, Nataliya Butych. Nataliya is the regional coordinator for Central and Eastern Europe at the International Office of Leibniz University in Hanover. And she is also the managing director of the German-Ukrainian Academic Society. She has been developing various international university collaboration projects within the region, exchange projects, DAAD-funded cooperations, and mobility programs at the University of Hanover. She is also the co-founder of the Ukrainian Association in Lower Saxony and its board member. She holds an MA in Translation, Interpreting, and Linguistics from Kyiv National Linguistic University, as well as a degree in Cultural Studies, Sociology, and Business Administration from the University of Hanover. Our second speaker today is Anna-Lea Wendland. She is a historian of Ukraine mostly, but also a specialist in science, technology, and society studies. She studied East European history, political science, and Slavic philology in Cologne and in Kiev, and she wrote her PhD with a by now classic monograph on the Russophile movement in 19th century Western Ukraine. Title is Die Russophilen in Galizien, ukrainische Konservative zwischen Österreich und Russland. She has worked at the GWZO Leipzig and at the Ludwig Maximilian University in Munich. And she has been at the Herder Institute for Historical Research on East Central Europe since 2009. Her habilitation thesis is titled Nuclear Modernity, Atomic Cities, Nuclear Work, and Nuclear Safety in Eastern and Western Europe, 1966 to 2010. And it's based on long field research at nuclear power plants in both Eastern Europe and Germany. And she has very recently published a book about Ukrainian liberation wars through history. It's titled Befreiungskrieg, Nationsbildung und Gewalt in der Ukraine, out with Campus this very year, a few weeks ago, in fact. Our third panelist is Steffen Dobbert. Steffen Dobbert is a journalist who has an education in European studies and in business. He has lived in Odessa and Kiev as a scholarship holder of the International Journalist Program, and he has made more than 50 research trips to different parts of Ukraine. His publication, besides various articles for Die Zeit and Zeit Online, Süddeutsche Zeitung and Spiegel, include a book on Euromaidan titled Euromaidan, Protest und Zivilcourage in der Ukraine, as well as a more recent book titled Ukraine verstehen, Geschichte, Politik und Freiheitskampf, published last year with Klett Cotta. And we could also mention that in 2017 he was honored with the German Reporter Prize. And finally, to the far left is Franziska Davies, who is assistant professor in East European history at Ludwig Maximilian University of Munich. She specializes in modern Ukrainian, Polish, and Russian history. And her recent publications include a book published together with Katya Machotina. It's a German book, but the English translation of the title is Eastern Europe's Open Wounds, Travels to the Memorial Sites of the Second World War. A very successful book tackling blind spots in German memory politics. She has also edited a volume titled Ukraine in Europe, Dream and Trauma of a Nation, which will come out in these next weeks, also in German. And her monograph based on her PhD dissertation will be published soon under the title Muslims in the Russian Army, Pragmatism, Tolerance, and the Limits of Imperial Integration. And Franziska is also a very vocal public scholar, both on the platform formerly known as Twitter and on more traditional German media. So Nataliya, well, myself, I'm Fabian Baumann. I'm a historian of Ukraine and also Russia at the University of Heidelberg. So Nataliya, why don't you start with your input presentation?
Thank you so much. So first of all, I would like to mention that most of the topics, of course, that were discussed during the day, the first part of the day and yesterday resonates with the public debates which take place in Germany. I have been living in Germany for over 20 years, and actually my master thesis was about public invisibility and writings of Ukrainian immigrants in Great Britain. And to research that, I had also have a look at the situation in Germany. And what I found out that actually Ukrainian community was a part of German society, but it was not visible to anyone. So Ukrainians living in Germany were well integrated, and most of them still are, and they were engaging in their own communities. So what does it mean for the public debate? They were not visible. And if we talk about public debate, it is much shaped by the media, of course, and also political, cultural leaders. And what do I believe is also needed, which was discussed as well in the first part of the day, is the at least basic notions about the country, which on my personal experience, and actually that was discussed today, is not that big in Germany in particular. So I do also think that it is important to include it into curricula, but not only at the universities, but also at the school level, because the knowledge is very, very limited. So what does it mean for the public debate? So maybe you know also the situation in Germany. So in Germany, since the beginning of 90s, over 2.3 million Spätaussiedler, so Russian Germans, came, and they also brought their worldview and their perspective, and very often lots of nostalgia for Soviet regime, which is actually quite strange, knowing this history of Germans from Russia. So Spätaussiedler, so these are Germans, so immigrants of German descent who came to Germany from various, so from the post-Soviet space. And these were the people who were very open to Russian propaganda, and they were targeted by Russian propaganda, especially if we talk about elderly, but not exclusively population. So they lived in Germany, but stayed in their bubble, like watching Russia Today every day. And so what we need for a public debate, we need actually advocates, and we need people who would be visible and who would take part in this debate. And very often in this all discussions, people from that were perceived as Germans in Russia, but as Russians in Germany, were included into this debate. And I will talk also about my experience. So Ukraine was discussed back in 2014 more as an object through this lens of Tsarist, Russian and Soviet imperialism and propaganda. And as the events 2014, the first like Green Man arrived to the Crimea, Ukrainians in Germany were at alert. And for example, I organized one of the first demonstrations to support Ukraine. It was 22nd of February back at 2014. And this demonstration attracted some attention, so media was there. We were not many people, so we were about 40 people. The half of them, these were Georgians, having the signs and slogans, today I'm Ukrainian, hands off of Ukraine, Putin, go away, and so on. And of course, we got some interviews, and there were people passing by, and some elderly couples came up and said, "Wait, what are you doing? You will annoy Putin. Go home. He will cut the gas." And that was the discussion back in 2014. Quite interesting that at the same day, the community of Russian Germans organized also demonstration for friendship between Ukraine and Russia. And on the next day, actually, what we saw in the media, these two demonstrations were put in one article. I was quoted like with some examples, like it's a very now important time, and we need to stop Putin, and so on and so forth. And they took a picture from the demonstration that another community organized, and it was a huge banner, like I would say maybe 10 meters long, saying Ukraine and Russia is one nation. So much about public debate in Germany and my experience. So of course I'm talking about Hanover. It's not Berlin, it's not Hamburg. It's more or less, I would say, so regional center. And as we organized back in February 2022, the next, so one of the demonstrations, there were 1,000 people there from all nationalities, and everyone came to us and said, what we can do. Please tell me what I need to do. So what this experience shows is the change of paradigm, of course, but what I see now, so all the public debate that we have now, not only people who never been to Ukraine or have any idea of Ukraine are invited to give a speech, but also Ukrainians are included. And this public invisibility actually is something that we are trying to address. And after 2014, there was a wave of civil engagement, and civic society, I would say, was engaged very much. And one of them was also the establishment back in 2016 of the German-Ukrainian Academic Society. Because Ukrainian community is not big, but very active. And there are Ukrainians who are living for generations in Germany, but now this time also, as I mentioned, people from all nationalities joined, and of course lots of German people. And so also scientists united in this association, so society, with the aim to promote the knowledge about Ukraine. So what we do in this society, it's open to all subjects of study. There are some physicists and lots of biologists and mathematicians. And each year we organize a conference about Ukraine and in different federal states, and show the cooperation, the existing cooperation. Because, again, academic cooperation stays invisible, and that's up to everyone to be a part of it. We also established an information platform where all public funded projects can be found, so that people actually who are interested in cooperation with Ukraine can join. And we organize also a PhD contest. And we were here hearing about window of opportunities. And I'm an optimist. I believe this window should be opened by each and a single person who wants to change the situation. And it is the time and the possibility, especially with this unprecedented solidarity. So if I compare 2014, where not a single German person was supporting the initiatives at our region, maybe it was different in other regions, it's changing. has changed, and especially this possibility for scholars to be part of academia. So this is the chance where we can entangle all these imperialistic views and also dive into the discussions, especially if we talk about German-Ukrainian cooperation, but also Ukraine being a part of Europe. And please use these opportunities. That's my input to the public debate. And it is quite important in the term of science communication to organize similar events, but also be engaged. That is, I think, what can keep attention. And also, like yesterday, Alexandra Matvichuk explained why it is important. And with this message, I would like to actually give the word to the next speaker.
Thank you very much for this impressive statement and also for staying perfectly on time. So you will be next week, Reed.
Yes, thank you. The interesting thing, I can link up my experience with yours because my husband is Ukrainian. We are living in Leipzig, and it was precisely this situation that when came when the Crimea invasion came, the Leipzig Ukrainians for the very first time were aware of themselves how much Ukrainians are in this town, because before that event they weren't visible and they weren't so self-organized as they are now. So it is precisely what I experienced. But my talk today is more on German discourses in general, political, historical, intellectual discourses on Ukraine, and I would name it Ukrainian or Ukraine imaginaries in the shadow of the Russian-German or German-Russian complex. And I would like to begin with this very conception or very word which made history, Chancellor Scholz's Zeitenwende, because it was the first concept which was directly connected to Ukrainian events. And this was for us Ukrainian specialists, of course, this was a positively shocking. We thought now everything will change because now for the first time Ukraine is connected to such a really a buzzword. But I think what we were forgetting in this situation, that Zeitenwende has to be read more in the context of German political rhetorics, which have a big prehistory beginning from the geistig-moralische Wende of Chancellor Helmut Kohl, the spiritual, moral reversal of leftist German projects of the 70s, going to the Wende, so the not revolution in the GDR, but the Wende, so the reversal of that was what was the German socialist experiment or experience. And then the Energiewende, the energy, not transition as it is as a rule translated into English, but it is a reversal, a return to something which is allegedly better. And this is the very point, because already this form of Wende was very closely connected to the fates of Ukraine, since the German Energiewende worked only with a contract with Gazprom and was heavily dependent on this Russian natural gas connection. And this was an aspect of a German reform project, which was heavily connected to Russia. And which was, and this very fact was for a long time was decisively underestimated, and it was only but in 2022 when we suddenly realized how dependent even a reform project in Germany is from this Russian fossilocratic complex, I would say. So this is a preamble to what I will now only shortly try to say on a few points, general trajectories of German thought on Ukraine. And I made a couple of observations for 4 points, constellations of German thought. The first time it is of course recalling what we have heard in this morning. First, German politics were really very reluctant to realize after 1991 that there is a new and a large new state in Europe, second largest territorial state in Europe. So Ukraine was, by and large, it was ignored for a very long time. Second, Ukrainian images on Ukraine then were in principle pre-configured by Russian imperial views of history. We already heard that before today. And I think the third point is the very important thing. It is especially what I'm saying as a historian of energy and technology. In principle, the German post-1990 economic model was a principle, I called it a despot pump. So, on the suction side, you suck Russian gas and cheap Chinese technology. And on the pressure side, you put all these high range technology products into the world. And this was the German success model. By the way, it was pushing German product to the new middle classes and the new oligarchies in Russia and China. By the way, for example, our automotive industry heavily profited from the economic development in China and in Russia as well. So I think this Prinzip Despotenpumpe, it was the very model of post-Cold War German economy, and it is heavily related to what happened with Ukraine afterwards. So, and the fourth point is that as a consequence of this German economic model, everything what Ukraine did in order to preserve its sovereignty, especially when related to gas politics, was regarded in Germany as troublemaking. Ukraine was the troublemaker. And so Germans were always looking for troubleshooters or for peacemakers and for models to get to tackle this situation. And so very much of our politicians' self-positioning towards Russia was, of course, shaped by this problem. And in this grand constellation, we can identify several points how German imaginaries about Ukraine developed. And it's a wide range of, I collected the points, it's over 10 points I could detect. It's a wide range from, which is partly derived from historical memory, what is memorized in families, for example. And that's, first of all, the Second World War. So it's grandpa on the Russland-Feldzug, which was very often Ukraine, not Russland. So people were, of course, having memories on Kharkiv and Odessa and Kyiv, but it was Russia and not Ukraine. The second thing is, it is connected to that, Ukrainians as collaborators, this is all these, contexts, why Germans are obsessed with Bandera, it has an aspect of even, I would say, self-exculpation, because if there is another evil, the Banderites and the collaborators and the Demjanjuks, so the own role is in a way relativized. So collaboration is a main aspect. Third one, it's a more recent one, it's Chernobyl. Chernobyl as a global disaster, but even in the Chernobyl case, Germans did not conceptualize Chernobyl as a Ukrainian disaster or Ukrainian catastrophe, even not as a Belarusian or Russian, but as a global thing, and as a thing what was important for Germans in order, for example, to instigate the energy transition. So it was very Germanocentric in a way, the way Chernobyl was perceived in Germany. And this point was about corruption, migration problems, prostitution as the main, traits of what is Ukraine to us. Ukraine poses problems. The fifth point is, we already heard about it, the imagination of Ukraine as a gespaltenes Land, a divided country. And we have loads of suggestive mappings of Ukraine with the Dnipro in the middle, and on the eastern side we have the Russian-speaking world, and on the western side the Ukrainian. Every specialist on Ukraine, and every who has been to Ukraine knows that it is not true, that language situation in Ukraine is much more complex than that. But such suggestive maps were really very, very influential. And in the aftermath of this perception of divided Ukraine, because we have all these notions of civil war, and all these misperceptions on language and identity in Ukraine. 6 points is what Germans completely ignored. That Ukrainian went through a civil society revolution, the Maidans and other developments. So self-empowerment, state, nation was built in a bottom-up process. It was not anymore connected only to language policy and ethno-national identities. It was more or less ignored by Germans. 7th point is the role of German historians. And now I come here, and we are here in Bielefeld, and some of you know that Ulrich Wehler was one of these German Großhistorians, not only him, but Norbert Frey, Ulrich Herbert, Andreas Wirsching, Ute Frevert. I remember several of them who were having statements on Ukraine, and it was more or less Jörg Barbarowski, of course, he was even the only Eastern European specialist in doing that. So it was very much talk about Ukraine as an incomplete nation, as a nation with volatile and not very secure borderlands, and with only recent borderlands, as if something as ancienneté in borderlands wouldn't be a problem in almost every nation state in Europe. In Russia, by the way, as well. Russian borders have been constituted after World War II, so they are very recent in historical perspective as well. So we have all these notions which were heavily influential because it was such, Großprofessoren who pushed that into the discussion. And so that was the number 6, and number 7, role of German historians. Number 8 is it is derived from it. It is a interesting conception on what is minority policies in Ukraine. Permanent misconceptions about the so-called Russian minority in Ukraine, and immanent normalization and legitimation of Russian claims and Russian demands to Ukrainian territory, or at least of the Russian role to be a legitimate representative of Russian-speaking people in Eastern Ukraine. This was in a way normalized, and it normalized, of course, the Russian territorial demands. The 9th point is the role of the German left, and it is, I already mentioned, much social democrats which were engaged in this discussion. And there we have this, obsession with Ukrainian nationalism, again, Banderites and so on, Ukrainian Nazis, Ukraine as the battlefield of a great game of imperial powers who battle against each other, and Ukrainians are merely an object, or in a way it is denying Ukraine's subjectivity in history. It was very, very common to leftist discourses on Ukraine. For example, I recall this Kiev Putsch meme, that the Maidan was no bottom-up revolutionary movement, but a putsch which was instigated by the CIA. And so I come to the last and 10th point. This is, I have to look a little bit on my chaotic manuscript. The 10th is a result of these imaginaries. It is this notion that Ukraine has to deserve our support. So what does Ukraine have to do in order to be so good to deserve our support? And I call recent developments for calling for regular elections in Ukraine in time of war. And for me, it was a very interesting discussion because it was especially Germans who reminded Ukraine that they have to do that, allegedly, apparently ignoring that we have an article in our constitution which allows not to have general elections during wartime and in state of war. So it's in the Grundgesetz, but in Ukraine it's not possible. So for me, it was the last evidence or proof that on these, constellations and general orientations in the German discourse towards Ukraine, and it of course mirrors, to time being, I think it mirrors deeply entrenched cultural hierarchies, which are, although we learned so much on Ukraine already, which are still very, very strong in the discourse. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I guess Steffen Dobbert will be the next speaker.
Thank you. Maybe just before I start to say the obvious, that I'm working for Die Zeit, but I'm sharing with you some of my private thoughts now. I don't have 10 points, it's less. And actually, I want to share with you some thoughts, criticism about German media I was part of, or I'm still part of. And I want to share with you parts of a speech which I had in front of the German Journalistic Association, Deutsche Journalistenverband. But let's come back to today, because today is the 596th day since the Russian invasion in Ukraine began. For almost 1.5 years, rockets are fired at cities, people are abused, buried alive, and executed. For almost 1.5 years, lies from Vladimir Putin have been part of everyday life in Europe. And it actually still feels like we have been living in a different world on this continent for almost 1.5 years, a world reminiscent of Stalin's and Hitler's crimes from the previous century. So, dear experts, thank you very much for the invitation. And yeah, dear expert and colleagues, what I just said is wrong. You all know this. It's not true that this war began raging in Europe for almost 1.5 years ago. It's just wrong. I guess you all know that the fact is that Putin started this war in 2014. And I guess you all know also that 14,000 human beings died between 2014 and February 2022. So my question is, why, I guess you all know this, but in my opinion, most of the German media or people who work in this profession don't know this. 2 days ago, when I prepared for this event, I Googled for 5 minutes. That was all of my preparation. And I quote, for example, ZDF, it's the second German television channel. They write, Russia has been waging a war of aggression against Ukraine since February 2022. I quote NTV, which is a private German media outlet, quite big. They write, fighting has been going on in Ukraine since 18 months. And the last example, it's still online on the publication site of Bundeszentrale für politische Bildung, which is actually quite important institution sponsored by the German state. They write right in the beginning, more than a year ago, on 24th February 2022, the invasion of Ukraine by Russian troops began. I quote it directly. And I guess I just gave you 3 of hundreds examples which are out there in the media. So the question is why it is like this. why it is like this after such a long time of war. The question is, we heard about this in the beginning, why the German population was so surprised when the war escalated in February 2022, and even more surprised in 2014. What was happening in this country, in this media, in this society? And maybe to bring the focus on these 9 years between these two dates, I was asking myself, what did journalists, the society, people who talk in public sphere, what did they do? I mean, there were people who decided who can go to a talk show. There were people who decided who can write a commentary in a newspaper. I think you decided as historians who can speak louder than others. What happened there? I guess you know, it was also a fact that the majority in Germany regularly believed, according to polls, that a greater danger emanates from a democratic country like the USA than from Russia. So my basic question was, when I was talking to the Journalistic Association, how we as journalists and experts have reported on Russia's conduct of the war for 8 or 9 years, and how we have analyzed it for the public. And I'm repeating, not analyzed for ourselves, not analyzed for a nice room in a university like this, for the public, for the majority. I think it's important. And now I want to give you just 2 examples from my own past. The first example is from October 2014, when the DPA, German Press Association, which is the organization the most important organization in Germany who produces the news. The news this organization produces were copied by almost all the newspapers. They are the most important. So in October 2014, I was in Mariupol, and the DPR, this organization, wrote, according to the OSCE, 7 civilians were killed in a missile strike near Mariupol in eastern Ukraine. As the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe reported on Wednesday, the missile hit a small village near the city of Mariupol. So there was a news. And according to the press database from Gunnar und Jahr, which I checked, 3 newspapers in Germany reported on this crime at the war. 3. I don't know if you know, but we have hundreds of different newspapers in this country. We have a very strong and differentiate newspaper landscape here, but 3 picked up this news. And the second example is from March 2022, not so far away. On this day, at prime time, at 7:18 p.m., I was listening to Deutschlandfunk, which is maybe the most important radio station here in Germany. And I heard more than a 7 minutes talk and a book review about the book from Klaus von Dohany. And I guess you all know, March 2022, this was a couple of days after the escalation of this war. And in this book, he argues that, for example, it's a legitimate German interest to defend Nord Stream 2. And he also argues in this book that Germany must break away from the model that Russia is an evil empire. And Germany must become a Putin-understanding country. So don't get me wrong, Mr. Klaus von Dohany has all the right in a democratic state to write a book, and journalists have all the right to report about this. But my question, which I told you in the beginning already, is why Deutschlandfunk chooses exactly this book in March, especially this book, because I checked it afterwards. There were a lot of reviews of this book already in Deutschlandfunk Kultur, which is another important radio station, and other media outlets, öffentlich-rechtlicher Rundfunk. And I'm trying to explain you my point that on the one hand, we have the DPR, the news from Mariupol, which 3 newspapers quoted, and not in a big article. And on the other hand, we have in March 2022, after the escalation, these 7 minutes review and talk about the Book of Johannes. In my opinion, something went wrong. And of course, I guess some of the answers have to be found in the change or evolution in media. Since the internet is very important, there are no, or some journalists argue, we are not anymore the real gatekeepers in a democracy. Everyone is a journalist nowadays, so we are not so important. But I would answer to this, the journalists are still important, and journalists still make decisions, and media is still important, maybe even more in these days and years in the digital age. So, yeah, I wonder that we as journalists have made some mistakes in the function with regard to Putin's wars in Schädler, in Georgia, in Moldova, in Syria, and then in Ukraine. So it was not the beginning, of course, the war in Ukraine. And now I want to just share with you, I want to talk with you about 2 women which I met and who maybe also characterize the problem which I just mentioned. The first woman is called Margarita Simonian. Maybe some of you know her. She has been the so-called editor-in-chief of RT, Russia Today, and which was called Russia Today in the past. And I met her as part of a research trip in November 2013, November, in Moscow in her office. And to be frank, I've worked for Die Zeit, for the Süddeutsche. I've seen some really big newsrooms. But when we entered back there in Moscow, the studios, just how big it was, how many people were working, I've never seen something like this before. This was very professional, and there were a lot of young people who know how the internet works. But my point is that this Margarita Simonian was surprisingly talkative at this meeting, and she said that as head of the gigantic RT channel, she regularly meets with representatives of the Russian foreign ministry, and then she decides what is the strategy for RT. So basically, she just admitted that she does not do any journalism function. This is not journalistic work at all. This is the basic. Okay, and now the second woman, Maria Olinchik, which is a woman which I met in December 2013 during the Revolution of Dignity. And she is a journalist. She used to work in Donetsk. And at the time we met, she was in Kiev, like me, reporting about the revolution. In December 2013, this colleague of mine, some years older than me, and what I didn't recognize, much smarter than me, because she told me in December that in her home region in Donetsk, there are specific plans how Donetsk region, Luhansk region should be torn apart from Ukraine. She said Yanukovych's party of region has these plans. It's going on. December 2013. And as I said in the beginning, I want to criticize journalists and also me, because I wrote about the meeting with her in one of my articles, but it was just, I don't know, it was even half of a page. And I think I failed back there because my impression is that the German audience, nor the German audience, nor the German politicians nor the expert at the NATO, not in the USA, no one listened to this voice of a Ukrainian journalist. And I guess you all know what happened. The revolution was successful, Yanukovych fled, but the war started. The annexation of Crimea started. And in December 2013, an educated woman from Donetsk, a journalist, said it all. And I failed. I didn't make it clear to the public. And I think a lot of other journalists in Germany also failed. And I guess you all know how successful Margareta Simonian, on the other hand, was. How successful RT was in the years from 2014 until 2022. And I guess you are all aware of that. Finally, after the escalation of the war, the European Union reacted. They said, okay, RT, this is going too much. And I want to finish my short input with a number which a colleague of us researched, Susanne Spahn, just last week, she published it, that in August 2023, more than 6 million clicks were registered at the German sites of RT. Although it's banned, although it's not allowed, and it's interesting because in the months before, it was around 1 or 2 million clicks. So we see even now, after all this was happened, that the disinformation of the public continues. And I would be thankful if we could discuss about this also. Thank you.
Thank you for those very self-critical remarks. Franziska, and I'll pass it to you.
Thank you. I just wanted to point out that I'll be really only speaking on a more abstract level about the role of scholars in public debates and media debates. And it's not a topic I have researched. So I'll please forgive me that I'll be speaking a little about personal experience, and that most evidence is going to be anecdotal evidence, and just stemming from my thoughts and my experiences and my interactions with colleagues over the last, especially since 2022, but I think it's very important that we make the starting point at 2014. And I'm going to make 5 points, if I'm not mistaken. So, number one, I really applaud you, Steffen, for being so self-critical, even though I really think that you personally, as many of your colleagues who were actually on the ground, did excellent work. But it's perhaps also finding that you didn't really make it into the talk shows until February 2022. So I think there was a big difference in the media debates between what journalists who had regional expertise were reporting and what, like, Berlin desk analysts in quotation marks, were producing for feuilleton debates in Germany. But I would also like to pick on this question of self-criticism, because I also thought about this for our own academic community between 2014 and 2022. It would probably need its own conference to talk about this, but I think we should, at some point, it's clear that our priorities now are different, also ask ourselves, were we loud enough after 2014? Or were we so kind of engaged in this idea that academics are also always have to be very kind of distant, supposedly non-emotional, always very nuanced in their statements, and should we not have been louder in our condemnation of and naming an aggression, and naming an invasion, and not a Ukrainian crisis than we did? Having said that, we have somebody here who did exactly that. And I would also like to know several others, and I'd also like to mention our colleague Jan Seberens, and Veronika and Jan are both examples of people who are very vocal. And somebody said yesterday the failure of Ostpolitik was not discussed. And of course that's true. In the mainstream media it was not discussed. But Jan Seberens wrote a text for Zeitgeschichte Online, I think it was in 2014 or the beginning of 2015, the failure of German Ostpolitik. And it's all there. It's absolutely all there. So, and of course there was this open appeal by a number of German public figures, Nie wieder Krieg in Europa, never war again in Europe, published, of course, at a point where there already was a new war in Europe. and there was an answer signed by 100 experts on Eastern Europe. And when you check this appeal, Nie wieder Krieg in Europa, and then there's a little sentence, there was a counter-appeal by experts on Eastern Europe, but it didn't receive any media coverage. And that's more or less exactly what happened. So maybe we should have been, and I think probably we should have been louder, but I suspect it would not have made a difference because there were certain parameters in certain interests, certain dynamics in the media. And I can also say from personal experience that my first kind of public intervention as a PhD student was in 2014, and a follow-up in 2015 when I reviewed what I now think, it was a very negative review, but I now think it was a very fair and very balanced review of the first book of my special friend, Gabriele Krone-Schmalz, former journalist and now turned Kremlin propagandist. And there were actually colleagues, and I mean, I really want to stress, this is anecdotal evidence, but there were colleagues, and it was only colleagues who work on Russia who said to me that was a mean review. And historians of Poland and Ukraine congratulated me. There were also historians of Russia and Ukraine congratulated me, but the only negative feedback I got was from Russia specialists. And I found that, and I mean, at the time, these were more senior scholars than me, and I was a PhD student, so it was kind of, did I do something wrong? I mean, maybe because I mean these are senior people. Maybe I would, maybe I really was being. Well, I didn't really think that, but it is a moment of being unsure of yourself. That's the kind of first self-critical point towards academia. The second thing, and I think this is, and Fabian said this in the beginning, we have been put into a role we have not been prepared for, and also in a media logic I, for myself, do not really understand. When because I kind of entered the wider public debate through Twitter, through social media, and then it kind of, I mean, I'd already written reviews like this one about Krone-Schmalz books and books of other Russland verstehe and like more traditional media, but for a wider public, it was via Twitter, and I until this day don't understand how this happened, because I don't really understand how Twitter works. So when the full-scale invasion started, I had under 500 followers on Twitter, and I only started tweeting like mad and in a very emotional fashion because I was unable to concentrate on my academic work. And then the kind of followership grew. I don't really know why it grew so quickly, but then you kind of have a public space, and then it kind of spills over into the more traditional media. And this is also, again, this is just a very kind of subjective observations. There's a different logic at play, in particular in social media, but not only. I mean, also depending where you write in the more traditional outlets, between how media logic works and how academic logic works. So in academia, you have this idea that you always have to be very, very polite. You always have to hold back your emotions. There's this image. I'll speak a little more about what is behind this image of the intellectual, the academic, who tries to be very objective, very rational, very calm. And I was anything but calm in the beginning. And I think that is one of the reasons also why academics sometimes fail to reach a wider audience, because we do have this very, and also extremely self-critical, which is actually a good thing, to say, can I really talk about this? Do I have enough expertise? And I haven't done research on this on my own. I'm only reproducing what other people have written. And all these things are of absolutely zero interest to journalists. So I think sometimes that can be one of the reasons why it's harder for academics to kind of reach the these talk shows and stuff like that, because there a certain and not necessarily positive style is required for you to get publicity. But then there's also the challenge, which I think is connected to this, that we had a discussion in our informal kind of email group about this. Several of you were in that group. Should we sit down and talk to so-called experts who are actually multiplying Kremlin narratives? Should we kind of share a stage with them and discuss things? And my position is we shouldn't. I've done it, to make it clear, but my general, very often I say no when I'm asked to do this for two reasons. Number one, because this is exactly what they are trying to do. They are pretending that what they are saying are analytical arguments, what they are saying is part of the academic discourse, and it's not. The people who, or some people, not all people obviously, but some people very visible in the German expert as a media discourse as supposed experts are not actually regarded as experts either in their own discipline or in Eastern European studies. So if we sit down with them in a public debate, to put it a bit more drastically, we are faking an academic debate for the public which does not exist. And in this process, we legitimize them as serious partners of discussion, which they are not. So those, I think, the two problems connected to this. The third thing that I have kind of I think I have decided that, especially with this German debate, best of all, that it goes round in circles. Sometimes I have the feeling we're discussing exactly the same thing as February 24th. So should Ukraine negotiate? And we've been through this like many times. And I think we should really think about because we are academics and we are used to hearing the argument of the other side, putting our own arguments forward, our instinct is to do it again and again and again. And I think it would be better to quote, I'm very thankful to a colleague of mine who pointed this essay out to me, Harry Frankfurt, who wrote an essay in 1986 on bullshit. And to just say, this is bullshit and I'm not having this conversation. Because we've had it, we've said it, and what you're saying is not a serious argument, it's just bullshit. But of course, that's not necessarily a very popular position, or which makes it popular among the wider public, or indeed with some colleagues. Which brings me to my third point, the question of the kind of double role you then have as an academic, especially, I mean, this is a special situation, because we have this full-scale war of aggression, so it is really a moment of moral clarity. And a moment, I think, where you cannot and should not make a cut between activism and academia. The role as an activist and the role as a scholar, because if we make this distinct, I mean, there are two different roles, I would agree with that, but I think we really have to counter this idea that these two roles are mutually exclusive. But that the role of the activist is a choice a scholar can make based on his or her expertise, which is, by the way, exactly what many climate scholars turned activists have done. They did their thing, whatever they do, and decided the policies are not good enough, and have kind of become activists. And I think the best way, at least for historians, is to make your position clear, to kind of be transparent. Yes, this is my. Yes, I am an activist. I don't see this as something that disqualifies me as a scholar. I do support Ukraine because I think democracies are better than dictatorships, because I want the victim of a war to win a war of aggression. I don't want the aggressor to win. And I think the best way to counter this notion is to be very transparent about your own position. And it's also interesting that this argument, and I mean, again, anecdotal evidence, but this argument that which I have, and Anna also, I'm really not the only one, has faced many times, you're not a really scholar anymore, you're an activist. It comes, in the case of Russia, from three people, especially from three people, Johannes Warwick, Gerd Mangot, and Alexander Liebmann. So I know this is not scientifically proven, so don't quote me on this, but what do these three have in common? They're all professors, they're all men, and they're all quite Russia-friendly. They are intellectually, of course, on different levels. No question at all about that. And they are pretending, and this is a pose. I mean, it's a construct. They are kind of presenting themselves in this very traditional fashion of the public intellectual, who is not led by emotions, who is a very kind of analytical, and who's not, loses his head. His is important at this point, and who is not an activist. They are not making clear that they also, of course, are having an activist position. Their position of supporting Ukraine less is no more or less activist than our position. So I think you have to be very open in these discussions and name it. And it does, I think, even if I can't prove it, it does have a gender aspect, it has an age aspect, and it has a hierarchical aspect. So if you're not a professor, if you're a woman, or even worse, so to speak, if you're a woman of color, the more likely it is that this kind of strategy of legitimizing you as an activist becomes. The fourth point, very briefly, of course, and I'm not fishing for pity here, I'm totally fine, but it can have, when you decide to go this path, and to say this whole kind of pretending there's a non-emotional position, pretending being emotional and being an activist is not compatible with being a serious academic. You do, of course, for some people in academia, you pay the price of losing part of your reputation because they maybe share this idea that if you're an activist, you can't be a serious scholar. Sometimes I think it's very maybe very banal reasons. So like, oh, she's only tweeting, she's not writing serious articles anymore. And I sometimes think, well, some people really don't know how to use Twitter, then they spend a lot more time there. I'm just going to, like a little anecdote. He's not one of those people, but this friend of mine said, I wrote my first thread the other day. I don't know how you do it. I was sitting here for 3 hours with my smartphone. And I said, well, you can put Twitter on the desktop. And he said, really? Yeah, and it's much quicker, and then there are apps, and you just paste your text into the apps, and it makes a thread, and the whole thing is done half an hour. Really? So I think some certain, if you're not, I mean, not that I'm a huge expert, but I think certain...
I do it only on my phone.
I don't know how you do it. That's like the more benign explanation. But of course, there's also this cultural construct that if you're emotional in social media, if you're a little more aggressive, and a non-acceptance of that could be different roles. Of course, I write things in social media I would not write in an academic article, but I don't really see that personally as a problem. And the very last point is about institutions. This is specific to my case, but I think Anna has made similar experiences. When my friend threatened to take me to court, there was lots of really important solidarity from colleagues, and many of you are in this room, and I thank you many times, but I want to thank you again for that. That was hugely important. But on an institutional level, and I'm speaking about my home university, there was zero support. So neither on the institutional, like Institute for Eastern European History, History Department, LMU, zero support, and also from the side of the from the head of the presidium of the presidency of the university, less than zero support for legal reasons. I can't spell it out, but not good. And I think this is quite shocking, because I think the engagement in public debates by scholars is going to become more important and not less important when we think about climate change, when we think about migration, when all sorts of pandemics. I mean, we had this. I got emails from doctors saying, "Oh, I saw you. I know how you feel," after COVID, of course. And I think that we don't have the backing as scholars, and particularly if you don't have a permanent position, we don't have the backing of institutions that could become, in my case, it was not that bad. It's a small case, but in like larger cases with larger corporations, with bigger enemies, it could become a problem.
Thank you, Franziska. And these are very, very important problems that you talked about. And I might just want to add a small counter-argument to what you said about embracing activism. This is something I've thought about a lot. And I think a problem with embracing activism proudly is that as scholars, we have a platform in the media because we are seen as objectives and And if we sort of confess to being activists, what we risk is that media outlets might think, well, Franziska Davies, she's a known activist, so we must put her next to a known pro-Russian scholar. And when I speak to media about interpretations of Ukrainian history, to put it very bluntly, I don't want anyone else to be quoted in that article. I have researched this history and I know it better than other people, and I don't want to be just one opinion on it. I want my opinion to be recognized as objective, which is not to say that I deny having any activist purpose in what I do, but it is a problem. I think it is a problem for the perception that we have. And that's just one thing I wanted to say, not to not to devalidate what you said. I thought it was very important. I think Anna-Lea Wendland wants to react very quickly, and then we'll have Benjamin with the next question.
It's only in order to perhaps put it in a slightly other perspective. Being here in Bielefeld, of course, I have to quote Luhmann and to say it depends on whether you make it transparent that now you are in a role in one system, and in the other situation you are arguing within another system. So I say in the system of science, where the binary code is truth or lie, or truth or not true, I am really referring to myself in the role of a scholar who did research on Ukraine or on nuclear technology, and so I have expertise, and I'm working within this system of truth or no truth, and so I have arguments, and the arguments have to be proven, or they have to be discussed. But if I am going into the political system where the binary code is to be in power or not to be in power, and I want to have a certain policy, to have a chance to be in power. So in this moment, I am an activist, and I can make it transparent. I can say, okay, I am not only every human being is always active in several social roles, and I can make it transparent that now I'm speaking to you as a scholar because I'm in that system. But if it goes to politics, of course, I speak as a citizen or even as an activist. And I think both things are legitimate. But we have to make it transparent for our audience. What is the matter now?
I mean, I definitely agree about transparency. I think part of the problem is sort of carrying over the legitimacy that being a scholar brings to the sphere of having an opinion on current politics. Benjamin Schenk.
Thank you. It was really great to listen to all of you. I have two questions. One question to all of you, and one question to Steffen. And since you have already starting being so self-critical, I would be curious to learn more about what happened in the Zeit in June 2021, when your colleagues decided to have a one-pager by Vladimir Putin in the Zeit, and not realizing what harm they caused by giving Putin such a platform. I think afterwards, and especially after February 2022, I think there was quite a crisis in the Zeit, but I still can't understand what happened in June 2021. Because I'm like a reader of the Zeit, and I was just shocked, opening the newspaper and seeing the one pager by Putin. And the second question I have, to all of you is, you have been talking about Simonian and about RT, and I think what you described as part of a strategy of a hybrid war. And this hybrid war is targeting not only Ukraine, but it's targeting us. It's targeting Western society. It's targeting democracy. And I still can't understand why we fail to call a hybrid war against our democracy really a hybrid war against democracy. We're always talking about war against Ukraine, which is of course important, but I think we have to frame this war in a much bigger framework, because Putin is quite open, and he has declared war on what he called the collective West. And why are we incapable of reacting to this declaration of war? And why is especially this German-speaking public so reluctant really to realize the threat that is in the room? It seems like this the strategy to think, well, this is still some civil war going on in Eastern Europe, which doesn't really affect us. And I think this is a huge misconception of what is really happening in Europe today.
Thank you. I think before we give answers, Kai Stube had a question as well.
Yes, thank you very much for this, for your talks. I think there were a lot of important and good points. My question relates to the development from 2014 to the present, and I'm a little bit would be a little bit more positive about what we have there when we compare the situation in 2022 and 2023 with the discussions we had in 2014, 2015. I think you can observe there, I think, a considerable change in the German public perception of Ukraine and also of these problems. And I think the German public was in 2022 much more informed than in 2014, and that is also the result of I think, in general, very good reporting of German media and public broadcasters, and also in most of the newspapers. That does not mean that not all the problems you mentioned here exist, but I think maybe you could a little bit comment on these developments in these.
I think maybe you will answer first.
Yes. Let me answer with the hardest question first, of course. No, let me first just give one sentence to what you discussed before. I think if you choose as an expert to be a public intellectual, you're not an activist. You have an opinion and you speak in public. And I'm afraid that someone will ask about this article here. And of course, because we are talking here in public, and I do work for Die Zeit, I want to remind you what I said in the beginning. And as a book author and a private person, I can say I had nothing to do with the decision. I saw it when it was published, and I guess I had the same emotions and thoughts like you had. And I criticized my own colleagues, but not a lot of people knew that this article was coming. And maybe just one word for this topic. It's quite personal for me, but we also have had a lot of discussions inside a big newspaper. And for example, in 2014, it's in the archives, I wrote an article, pro-contra article, Michael Thumann, a colleague of mine, which I really respect and is a really good journalist, especially when you look to Eastern Europe, argued back there that Germany should not at all supply Ukraine with weapons. And I was arguing in 2014, yes, it sounds maybe like a paradox, but you need weapons to stop this war. But back there, this was published, and just to remind us about how the situation changed, and to give a little answer to the last question also, back there, the site had to help me that my private address is not accessible anymore. There were a lot of threats to murder me, my family. It was a totally different situation. And yes, this changed. And I think the good thing in a democracy is that we can criticize each other. And we shouldn't stop to criticize. And because out of criticism, we can learn and we can get better. And yes, I also have some optimistic views. I read a lot of articles which are much more informed about Ukraine than it was in 2014, 2015, or even before. I don't want that this is forgotten, but I decided for my statement in the beginning to criticize, because maybe then if we criticize more, we will even get better. And just a few sentences for what you asked about the hybrid warfare. This is, for me personally, I share your opinion about this topic, and I still think the German public sphere is not prepared for this. And although Russia used parts of the hybrid warfare program already in Georgia, 2008. In 2008, we have evidence that Russian so-called journalists were on the battlefield before the battle started, and they knew what they had to report. And we are facing the hybrid warfare threats in Germany in these days. They use refugees over the Belarusian border. We just had the information last week about the pipeline, which was attacked by someone, the infrastructure, and I think by the 4 or 5 parts of the hybrid warfare, one part is disinformation. And the situation now in Germany is that pro-Kremlin racist party like the AfD convince 30%, 20 to 30 to 35% is for me a signal that this hybrid warfare is successful. So if I'm sometimes also not so optimistic, and I'm pretty much scared what's happening in this country, and I have to think about what I read about the 1920s, and in my personal opinion, and I'm very thankful that you decided to do this, experts have to speak up. We have to shape the society. We have to go into the media if we are aware of these threats, and if it's, I don't call it activism, when you want to prepare a country that this war doesn't become a hot war like it's in Ukraine. So this is a very important topic, in my opinion, like you mentioned it, and I would also agree that it needs, from experts who are maybe here, specific action. You have to maybe do something. You have to work. Maybe it's, I mean, you said it's maybe not okay to do it over and over again. Yeah, when you just made 2 points, you said don't discuss with bullshit, people who have bullshit opinions. I have some doubts about this opinion, and I also have some doubts about the opinion that it's not okay to do it over and over again. Yes, democracy means to debate over and over again. And this war started 2014. It's in Europe. We have now 2023. It will not end next month. And if we want a democracy, a liberal democracy, we have to debate over and over again.
I would just very briefly like to pass the word to Nataliya on the debate of how German perceptions of Ukraine have changed since 2014. You talked about your experience in 2014 earlier. What is your vision of this? Do you think like media portrayals have actually become more realistic?
So actually, I do see the change, but I still address, for example, this topic of hybrid war, but it is not taken seriously. I don't know why. I have an impression that actually Germany is living in its own bubble, like trying to like Germany is immune to everything that it happens, and it doesn't affect each and every of citizens, and only some people like woke up back in 2022. But still, I think this is this influence of propaganda that was done, plus these concepts and notion of Wandel durch Handel, but also science diplomacy. 2014, what happened at universities, and my university is not exceptions. We were discussing this issue, and it was told, okay, we initiated cooperation in Russia to overcome the differences, and that is why we should keep communicating, and through the exchange and cooperation, we will be a facilitator for a better understanding between two nations. So this perception of in Germany, in my opinion, is somehow not that objective. So, and the question with hybrid war, for me, it's a mystery. The same as the situation in the media, why they not they are now changing, but where was media back in 2014?
Okay, Franziska, you wanted to respond briefly, and maybe do we have only 5 minutes more? Okay, so please.
Okay, very briefly. I do want to get back to this point of activism, and maybe just on a very basic level, what is activism? And if you follow the Karl Popper definition, ist eine Position, die sich gegen ein passives Hinnehmen entscheidet, on a very basic level. Yeah? So, and it's so I still think there's a position which decides against just responding passively to what is happening in the world. And I still think we just have to, I kind of understand your pragmatic argument, because we still have this idea that activism somehow devalues your scholarly position. It's probably maybe strategically better to not be as transparent, but actually I would be with Veronika and saying the best thing we can do as scholars is to always be transparent about, especially as historians. I mean, that's what we keep telling our students, to be as transparent as possible about your own position. And about what you said, Steffen, I get that, and I think maybe I should make clear what I meant. What I mean is, don't share a stage with these people. You can still write articles saying they're doing the same bullshit again, but don't enter into a direct dialogue, because then you're legitimizing them, especially if you are put in the position of one expert against another expert. And you know exactly, neither the political scientists nor the Eastern European people who know Eastern Europe, take this guy seriously. So why do we keep legitimizing him as or her as a scholar? I also agree with what Struber has said. I think the main difference is now that we have an activated part of German society which is very much pro-Ukrainian and really understands what's going on, and that's something we did not have between 2014 and 2022. But these old imperial reflexes we had are still there, and they're very powerful. And I don't have to go into detail now what they consist of. And to Benjamin's this question of hybrid war, I really think that we actually would need Joko Prochaska here now, because you need to know things about the psyche of people. Actually, we need psychologist help, because what I've learned as a historian at university, I cannot explain the level of denial of reality we are seeing not only in parts of the society, but also with leaders. And I suspect it has something to do with a certain generation, and this generation is still very powerful, I have two explanations. One, that this generation would have to kind of face up that they have believed in something that was wrong. They're more or less their entire adult life. And that's a very hard step to make. And the second thing is, I mean, the news, like people like us have, this is a war against us. It's dangerous for us, for you. We need more weapons for Ukraine. We need to become ourselves military stronger. It's not a nice message. It's a scary message. So maybe there's also this element of wanting to go back to this imaginary world where everything can be solved through dialogue.
So maybe just to restate my position on the activism debate, I think what we need people to understand is that our political positions are based in our scholarly insights and not the other way around.
Yes,
that's okay, so we have time for 3 more questions. I will pass you the word in the last round. Frank Brunner had a question.
I can make it quite shortly. I agree with most of the statements, absolutely. But to a certain point, I have the idea that public debate is somehow understood quite limited in this discussion. So it's sort of mass media. It's like TV shows. It's the leading newspapers and so on. And I would agree that yes, well, the German public was not prepared, but how was it prepared? And I would say we probably overlook the influence of trivial literature, for example, like novels by Konczal. I think the generation of our parents basically was over decades influenced by war novels and by Konczal or others. So I think we somehow in our debates overestimate the very recent contemporary political debate. And I would say a public debate is formed by very different approaches on very different levels. And one level is to write textbooks, another level is to make professional journalism or to communicate in social media. So to limit to focus the contribution historians, academians can make to just one important aspect is for me a bit too seem too short.
Yes, question on the left here, and then Gabriele Freitag, and then we will.
Svetlana Budovskaya, Museum Berlin Gasforce. It's not a really question, but just a remark. If you read in Russian, former Russian President Medvedev posts regularly that Russia should bomb Berlin. It's about the war against the West. The president of Chechnya, Kadyrov, also posts regularly that Russia should have Berlin back. It's already, I understand, there's a crazy things, but they are not private persons. That's, former Russian president and current president. But I never read about this in German media. I agree that the community, the society are not prepared, but how we can prepare them to face the reality? For example, for my collection, I bought last year some objects from Russia, from Russian propaganda, also current Russian flag, na Berlin, go to Berlin. But nobody wants to exhibit it to the public, and no one from public wants to face this current propaganda.
Thank you very much.
I also think that one can be a scholar and an activist, and that it is very important that you always show in which role you are currently speaking. But I really wonder how we go along with emotions. I mean, we are all emotion-driven, I think in scholarly work as well as in activist work. But what do we want to reach? And I think, especially as an activist, I suppose there are moments when it is important to be emotional. But I suppose that in most cases it makes sense to evoke positive emotions. For instance, sympathy. Let's say sympathy with the Ukraine, sympathy now with the Israeli population that is murdered. I'm not sure to what extent it makes sense to arouse negative emotions. I mean, you use the term bullshit twice. I'm not really sure if you achieve your aims, if you have a very negative wording. So I suppose people that you want to persuade, if they read things like bullshit, they will not be able emotionally to understand what you're doing. So I think that a really a moderate use of emotions, I think, is important if you want to reach something as an activist.
I mean, guess we can agree that it is bullshit. The question is just whether we should call it that. Kornelia, how many minutes do we have?
Well, it depends on how long the coffee break is supposed to be. I perhaps ask for final statements, and then we can continue over coffee.
Yes, relatively brief final statements, and you will go first.
Yes, if speaking on emotions so much, I would really propose to get you Corporal Hasko and to put the Germans on the couch. And, because it is not only this thing, it is very important what you said. Because if you have this communication situation, for say Mr. Farvik is on the podium and me, you know, and what happens? Mr. Farvik plays a role. It's simply you have to get it very. Neutrally, he's playing the role of the dissident. So if you call him, "You are a bullshitter, Mr. Farvik," all the public will be confirmed in this dissident role of Mr. Farvik, who wants to play that role. So he is confirmed in it, and he will be having success with his role another day and the next day. So I really think we can afford to sit on a podium with him and to say, "No, Mr. Farvik, I do not agree with you, and for reason 1, 2, 3, and we really can debunk the bullshit very well, I think." But the other more complicated thing is the playing on, you may say, collective emotional body of Germany and Russian propaganda or the Russian hybrid warfare. They really know very, very well how to organize tailored messages towards the German public and their fears. So consider all these messages about using nuclear weapons, all the threat communication around Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, which is, by the way, I think it's a Ukrainian mistake. The Ukrainians, they enlarged these threat communications by evoking threats on, it's 6 times Chernobyl and so on. And this is what the Russians want, to have them there at this point. And I think if we do not really well analyze this fear communication, threat communication, and how we can debunk and deconstruct it, we will always be on this in this situation that we are a target of this tailored fear propaganda from Moscow, and they really know well where the weak points in Germany are, and I think we should be prepared. Preparedness is a key word in this.
Thank you very much. Who else wants to say something to conclude?
Briefly about this. I think it's hard in this context to speak about positive and negative emotions, because if you, for example, tweet about war experiences of Ukrainians, if you kind of translate that to German or English, what does that evoke? Disgust, helplessness, all these kinds of things. But I think it is, those are not positive emotions, but I think it's important also, we are or have dealt with this on a historical level, to make the people who are victims of this war, to make their experiences heard, and you can't evoke positive emotions about that. And then also about, I've, to be transparent, I have been on a podium with Fabian, and of course I didn't say into his face, bullshit, yeah? I did engage with him, but I think the goal is actually, to put it very bluntly, that he's not invited anymore. And we get there by saying, it's bullshit, I'm not going to have a discussion with this guy. It's ludicrous. So I think maybe, and also last point about emotions, we are talking about genocide, and it makes us human that we react emotionally to genocide. And I think one problem of this German debate is that, like Habermas, like all these open letters, they distance themselves from what is actually happening. They do not say what is happening is genocide. And let's have a civilized debate on whether Ukraine. They never choose this wording because then the whole strategy wouldn't work. But what they're basically saying is, let us have a civilized discussion for this 100th time of whether Ukraine should surrender to a genocidal regime. And I think we shouldn't play this game.
Thank you.
Yeah, maybe just a few words about. If I understand you correctly, about the levels of a public debate, that there are certain levels. Just first, thank you for this event. I think it's very good, very brilliant. I learned a lot. Yes. And this is maybe an answer to this. You had yesterday here Alexander Matvichuk, a Nobel Prize winner. And excuse me, Bielefeld is a nice city, but you had her in Bielefeld. And in my opinion, I saw that we have a big hall here in the university. There should have been hundreds of students. The newspaper should have been here. And talking about level of debates and level of public sphere, maybe I just want to put a little question mark if it's okay to stay in a bubble, or it's in this time okay to put a Nobel Prize winner on a very big stage in Bielefeld. And just a quick word again, I don't agree with still, only in this point with Franziska. I think it would be good if there would be in Neubrandenburg a panel with Gregor Gysi and you. I want to see you, Veronika, on a panel somewhere with Krone Schmalz.
No, please no.
Yeah.
Oh, I will destroy
It's
her.
and I will explain this. I understand. I also have
She's defeated. We can forget about it.
No, let me put my point. I think I also have emotions, I understand, but I'm living in an area in Germany, former East Germany, where people living really in another universe compared to what I'm listening here. And if these people who are well informed like you don't do this, no one will do it there. No one there will go on a panel. So, in my opinion, you should do this, all of you, and because it's important for our future in Europe.
But I've never been invited to an former East German province, I have to say.
So to sum it up, I would say, this panel discussion shows us that it is time for academia to reflect on their role and share this experience with the colleagues and maybe debate within their scientific communities their role and keep doing the research of high quality and share also the insights, like in the terms of science communication.
Thank you very much for this instruction to the colleagues. I think we will end at this point. We have deserved coffee, and thank you very much.